Hey, everybody out there, this is Danny Bedrosian, the keyboard player for George Clinton Parliament-Funkadelic, and you are watching Musicians Reveal with Joe Kelley.
My next guest here on Musicians Reveal, I'm really excited to have him back on the show. He is a keyboardist extraordinaire, producer, musical director for P-Funk, esteemed author. You know, if you want a huge book with the whole history of the P-Funk Parliament-Funkadelic song reference, that was his first book, I believe. He's ready to release. It's out there now. Make My Funk, the P-Funk, talking about a critical and a great time with the Parliament-Funkadelic history. He's the man, Danny Bedrosian. How you doing, Danny?
Good, Joe. Thanks for having me back. So excited to talk to you again.
Yeah, you alluded to the work of the second book, Make My Funk, the P-Funk, last time you were on.
Right.
What was the genesis of you, after you had this huge reference book, to focus on the 3 albums and get all the history down?
Yeah, so my bandmate Lige Curry, bass player, he describes it as Danny's book had a baby. And I thought that was kind of a good way of putting it, because in a lot of ways it is my first book's baby, kind of. The theme of both is the same, you know, it's P-Funk history. Although, you know, of course, my first book was a very general reference book with a lot of real specific information. It was, you know, really for the dissemination of information, essentially, you know, and calculating information, statistics, for the point of reference in historiography. Whereas this book, the new book, and I have a copy right here, authorized P-Funk, I'm sorry, Make My Funk, the P-Funk,
Right.
the new one, it is more of what you would call a monograph, which is essentially a history book. This is much more what I was trained as a degree-holding historian, and at the time a history major. This is the kind of book we were trained to write, and not just to study and research, but we were trained to write these kind of books, these monographs. These are essentially history books that have all of the what you would call historicity, you know, cited sources, very, very detailed footnotes and endnotes, extremely detailed work cited, and all based on primary sources and then cited when secondary sources are used. It's very much, you know, when writing about history, I've said this before, you know, legitimation is key. So when you're writing a book of this type, you want every source of legitimation backing you up, because I mentioned in the introduction, there's not a lot of historiography about P-Funk, this longest running popular music group of all time. You could hold all of the literature on P-Funk historiography in your hands quite easily, with very little trouble. And so my mission was to start creating a series of monographs that deal with the P-Funk in a far less cursory way than those books the aforementioned books that I just had talked about. Because essentially what I wanted to do was have something that is P-Funk centric and deals with specific time periods. Now, I had been approached by my editors from the publishing company not long after the release of the authorized P-Funk song reference, possibly 3 months after, possibly less than that. And they took me out to eat and said, you know, your book is doing really well. I think at the time it had become, by that point, the bestseller of the year for Rowman and Littlefield. And they, you know, sort of saw the writing on the wall that, you know, maybe some more books would be a good idea. And that's how they approached me with it. We would like some more books from you. Specifically, I said, yeah, books. Okay, with a plural, books.
Right.
You know,
Books.
because this first thing was kind of a lifelong labor of love, as you and I had spoken about before. There was a time in the gestation of its of its creation process that it may have not even become a book, maybe a database or something, far less official. But, in its creation, after all of those decades, the idea of writing more books wasn't necessarily like right around the corner to me. However, I had in mind the necessity to create a second edition of the first book, something that they had kind of said, no, you need some more, you got to wait some more years before that, Danny. In the meantime, let's look at some other books, some other content dealing with the same subject matter, but in more specific approaches. So they had come to me about, about doing a Mothership Connection book,
Okay.
dealing specifically with the Mothership concept in P-Funk, and specifically the Mothership Connection album, iconography, etc. But I, for lack of better words, kind of shot that idea down because I kind of felt it might be too cliche. I might not be saying it the right way, but when you're dealing with something like the Mothership, you have this sort of iconic, transcendent imagery that comes into everybody's mind. And when you're dealing with something like this, it'd be like writing a book about the cross. Without being sacrilegious, the idea of writing about the cross. Now, nobody is going to, especially a historian, they're never going to be able to get all the nuts and bolts and all of the emotional transcendent feelings that go with the iconography of, say, the Mothership, for instance. Even with all the important information, you're not going to ever get everything that everybody wants, because the nostalgia attached to a Mothership concept is so strong and so specific and singular to each human being. Every person that remembers the first time they saw the Mothership land, whether it, if it's people from Gen Jones or boomers from the older generation that are remembering 1976 and seeing the Mothership land and remembering the Earth tour in 77, or even from my generation seeing it in 96. There's just too much callback, too much emotional callback, I felt, for a history book, a legitimate monograph to be written about such a thing. I feel almost like it would be better to write a philosophical treatise on the Mothership concept as opposed to someone like me writing actual history, because I'm trying to write legitimate history. These aren't what do they call it? These aren't memoirs. As great as memoirs are, and as legitimate and important as memoirs are to the social bibliography of P-Funk historiography, this is a monograph. This is a very specific type of history book that's written not just for the lay people and the music lover, but also for the academic, so that it can stand aside my authorized P-Funk song reference at an academic library, at a school, at a conservatory, not just in the brick and mortar bookstores or on Amazon. So I'm trying to I wanted to create something in that way, even though I wasn't immediately thinking about writing more books. I also wanted to keep my relationship with the publisher. And I think that was smart, because it wasn't long after this meeting that my publishers, Roman and Littlefield, got bought out by bigger publishers, Bloomsbury, which is a UK-based publishing company. And they're the ones who published this book. So they bought Roman, kept all of Roman's people, from what I know. And, they said the machine works well. I think they were buying it because they were having success. And I feel like I'm a part of that success, having been the bestseller of the year and one of the top, if not the top sellers of all time for that publisher. So being a part of the success and the acquisition by Bloomsbury has been both effective and important for my promotion of this book. However, before I even get to that, I countered them essentially and said, okay, Mothership, that's okay. How about a 1975 book? And then they said, okay, well, what does that mean? What is that? I said, well, 1975, the band released more than just Mothership Connection at the end of the year. They released 2 albums in April as well. Parliament released Chocolate City, It was their second album for Casablanca Records, and it was sort of the beginning of Casablanca having their kind of bigger publicity push for Parliament. And then Let's Take It to the Stage by sister band Funkadelic, essentially the same group, which is my favorite album of all time. And I talk about this a few times, how like sort of that album before the big revolutionary album a lot of times can be the creative peak in a lot of ways. So In a Silent Way by Miles Davis before Bitches Brew, or what's the one, the Beatles right before Sgt. Pepper, Rubber Soul. So like Rubber Soul, you know, these really creative strides are made right before the commercial revolution or commercial peak or the beginning of the commercial peak or whatever you want to call it. And you see that with the period right before Mothership Connection. And I think it's really important, you know, Mothership Connection being the first platinum album, that cannot be underscored. In fact, it is the main focus of the book. Again, there is a mothership on the front of this thing. Right. So it still is leading to the catalyst of this massive paradigm shift. And that is the theme of this book. However, without looking at the year of as a whole, without looking at the immediate period before, in Parliament-Funkadelic history, there's no way for you to truly understand the gravity and the importance of a jump like the jump to Mothership Connection. So I felt like understanding and describing and giving the history behind all three albums from that year paints a much more correct and accurate picture of where Parliament-Funkadelic was at that time. So it's important to note that at the beginning of 1975 and really up until the success of Mothership Connection, Parliament-Funkadelic were still riding in two station wagons. Essentially, it was about 11 guys in the band at that time. And they were still, as I describe in the book, sort of my description for them, was that they were the underground darlings of the Chitlin circuit. You know, they did have some charting success up until this point. You know, Parliament was starting to become more the hit machine, and Funkadelic, while having more albums, was defiantly more underground. And so with that, if you look at something like, say, One Nation Under a Groove, which was a huge success for Funkadelic, and Funkadelic's biggest hit, actually all of P-Funk's biggest hit, ironically, Funkadelic had the biggest charting success with that one song. If you look at Funkadelic's history, it took them 9 years to surpass their last highest charting single, which was I Betcha, from their very first album, from the self-titled Funkadelic album. So no albums from 1970, 71, 72, 73, all the way to 70, 78 until One Nation had surpassed that, and it didn't go super high. I Bet You was, I don't remember what it was, number 20 on the R&B chart, something like that. It made huge waves in Detroit and some other cities, but it didn't crack the top 20, I don't think. So when you see, so they made it all the way till One Nation Under a Groove for it to surpass Funkadelic's last biggest charting success, that shows you that Funkadelic was more underground, album oriented, and and so this was, a time where they were just kind of breaking out of the underground and making their way into what would be the beginnings of superstardom. So I thought it was like a really important paradigm shift in what we consider P-Funk history. And I mean, and speaking of P-Funk, the term is coined in this year. So it's before that they were a Parla Funkadelic thing. And so the beginning of using that actual term is coined and exposed for the first time at the very beginning of the Mothership Connection album. So I just felt like 75, there's no year in P-Funk history quite like 75, where they really go from, important, still very important, still charting, but much more underground, to this platinum band all of a sudden that also gets dropped on them a major budget from Casablanca Records to do what would become the Mothership tour, to have, to go from the Chitlin circuit to arenas. That's all kind of shifting in this year. So it felt like 1975 was really what I wanted to sort of play with as the theme of this book.
So when you're talking about putting the book together with the history and everything, of course you have the general right there, George Clinton, still here leading the ship. What's it like? You want to verify everything and bring in other people who were there and recording all this. Where do you start yourself with something like that?
Yeah. So I definitely did a bunch of new primary source interviews, and of course, having George nearby and healthy and willing to help is of the utmost importance. Of course, as you know, we do a podcast together, a bump by bump rundown, where George
great.
and I do like a deep dive into different songs. That was sort of the catalyst for me to be able to ask him, while we were filming Bump by Bumps, I said, George, do you mind if I record you and we talk a little bit about these 3 albums, because he knew about the book, want to get some quotes from you. And was really able to get some amazing stuff from George. George is the kind of guy who does at least one interview a day, it seems like, and has been interviewed so many times that I know he has a bunch of like just general answers for everything. It was so great to get these really fresh takes from George about stuff maybe he had never been asked about before, about the sort of nooks and crannies of some of the recording processes, which relates back to our podcast, of course, but also some of the stuff that I've just never heard him talk about, like things that got him into popular music in the first place as a preteen, things about sci-fi that he hadn't touched upon as specifically in relation to influencing his ideas for Afrofuturism and for the Mothership Connection album and the funk opera, as it were. Um, things that I just never heard him talk about before. And so that was amazing. But I also knew, much like with the authorized P-Funk song reference, I wanted to have as well-rounded a group of individuals for primary source interviews that I could get as possible. Now, luckily, I also still had a plethora of information from those who were around and alive at that period and active in that period from my previous interviews for the first book. So I was able to use and utilize some stuff that I didn't even use for the first book from those interviews. And then also keep in mind, and I talk about all this in the introduction, I also did, scores of informal interviews with a lot of the guys that are now passed before they did. So like Cordell Boogie Mawson and Bernie Worrell and Gary Scheider, Richard Cush Griffith, guys that I knew that aren't with us anymore that I was able to talk to while they were still with us. And that was beyond a blessing, beyond the best chance and luck that you could have, because that provided me with information that sadly doesn't exist anymore. So there's the incorporation of that stuff. But then I did a whole bunch of new interviews with several people that actually didn't even work with me on the authorized P-Funk song reference, but they either found out about me through that book or we were friends and we just didn't get a chance to do those interviews at that time. The key one that I'm thinking of is Fred Wesley. So to have the great trombonist Fred Wesley and arranger, band director of James Brown and P-Funk and Bootsy's Rubber Band fame, JB's, Horny Horns, all that stuff, to have him, because he was really the architect of a lot of the horn arrangements, not just for P-Funk, but of course for James Brown. So to have that insight, keeping in mind 1975 is the only year when you have Fred Wesley playing in the James Brown band and then pivoting to Parliament-Funkadelic, that's a paradigm shift right there alone. So I did some serious interviews with Fred as well, very in-depth, much like what I did with George. And he provided me with a wealth of information. We may have even cracked some codes on some stuff that had not been privy by public audiences at large before. And so I don't want to give up too much information, but there's a lot of good stuff in the book that does uh, deal with some new kind of discoveries about these 50-year-old albums. And so getting to talk to him was amazing. Of course, other super important people like Gary Mudbone Cooper, who did everything from vocals to vocal arrangements to drums to percussion on those albums, and people kind of the less remembered sort of heroes underneath, like Reggie McBride, who was one of the bass players on the Let's Take It to the Stage album. He played with Rare Earth at the time, and Rare Earth and Parliament-Funkadelic shared a management team at the time. So a lot of the Rare Earth guys played on that album. Excuse me. So you have interviews with people that have never really even, like Reggie McBride. I don't know how many interviews he's even done about his experience with Funkadelic. So that stuff is kind of like never before seen or heard stuff as well. And then to sort of give it a good idea of the behind the scenes and the management aspect and the background aspect, the administrative aspect, the creative kind of behind the scenes stuff. George's longtime manager of 50 years, Archie Ivy, also provided brand new primary source interviews, brand new for this book, that deal with a lot of the minutia of the recording process in 1975 and what was going on in George's head in terms of creation of these funk operas and what their roles were. And it's really some fascinating stuff. Like I said, a lot of this stuff has never really been talked about or seen the light of day. So it's a fantastic read, even just for those primary sources alone. It's a really wonderful thing.
And I love the bump by bump rundown and that how you jog George's memory. You know, you bring something, he looks a little like, and then, oh yeah, and he gets right into it. I like how, I mean, you've got the rapport with George. I mean, you guys are close, but you draw it out of him, and it's very entertaining.
Thank you. I mean, his memory is so good that it doesn't
Yeah.
take much, and I think it just takes the right person who knows him and knows how. You know, I worked with him in the studio for the last almost 30 years, so I know he's the same way in the studio. All he needs is a spark, and I'm not the first one to say this. You know, like you can hear this from everybody, from Fred to Bootsy to they all said it. He just needs like a spark. It could be like one thing, and he's gone. He's gone, and he's just creating lines and words and concepts and rhythms and vocal arrangements and melodies and rhythm arrangements and changes and all these different things. It's all coming out of just like one, hey George, you know, bop, and that's all he needs, you know. So you know, I tried to do that same way with like, oh, you remember this thing? I'll just give him a year. Or do you remember what? And his memory of sessions is so good. You know, you
Right.
think about how many tens of thousands of sessions this guy has
Yeah.
done, and for him to remember almost every person that was at almost every session, where it was, who the engineer usually was, who was there, even people that didn't play on it that were just there, like it's crazy, it's insane, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, real honor to be able to do that with him.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important, and you're documenting all this for years when we're all long gone, but we can enjoy it now. But the younger generation, like the Prince fan base is just as passionate, like the P-Funk fan base. Dwayne Tudor's doing that as well. And all the Beatles from
Yes.
way what you mentioned the Beatles. I took a Beatles mini course in high school. Just, you know, it was like 1 week of just at a prep school studying the Beatles, it was great. Yeah.
Yeah, that stuff is important. I think that, like, you know, musicology, you know, has reached a higher level in academia in the past 30, 40 years. And, you know, it started with jazz studies in terms of American music. And now, you know, you have something like a P-Funk, which has a 70-year history, finally getting its due, but it took literature, you know, it took the written word, print, you
Mhm.
know, to sort of uh, induce academia into taking on that role of pushing the musicology of it, because people are going to school for musicology now. There's musicologists and ethnomusicologists and all these different kinds of, the music sphere has really grown in the last 40 years. So something like P-Funk history, I mean, it's perfect for that environment. It's perfect for that arena because it's vast, it's epic, and it touches on pretty much every musical movement and mini movement in the second half of 20th century American history. So, and speaking of which, in the new book,
Mhm.
there's a whole chapter. The historian in me wanted to really deal with the history of 1975, not just the music of P-Funk. So there's a whole chapter towards the beginning of the book that deals with things that happened in 1975, important goings on in 1975. So like the Watergate, Ehrlichman and Haldeman being, going to court for the Watergate scandal, the official end of Vietnam, Gerald Ford proclaiming Black History Week, it would later be Black History Month, things in sports, things in technology, things in world politics, decolonization, wars breaking out in different parts of the world. There's a lot of stuff that happens in 1975. There's a lot of stuff that happens in that 8-month period and directly prior to that period where P-Funk is having this massive paradigm shift. So I draw parallels between the things happening in the world and lyrics that George had, things happening in the world and concepts that the P-Funk was working with, and how at one point at the begin, again, another sort of paradigm shift, at the beginning of the year, things happening in the world are directly impacting P-Funk. By the end of the year, things P-Funk are doing are directly impacting the world. So there's a lot of great arguments that can be made about the importance and the precedence for 1975 as a game changer year in P-Funk history.
Where do you prefer people to buy the book? Do you have a preference or just wherever it's available?
Wherever it's available, wherever you buy your books, Bloomsbury is the publisher, so I always recommend that people get it from there. But if you get it from Amazon, leave a review. Anywhere that you can leave a review, please do. And of course, we're recommending to everybody that they recommend it for their local libraries, for their local school libraries or university libraries if they go to school, and for their local brick and mortar bookstores, because all of the major chains, your Barnes and Nobles, your Books A Millions, and so forth, they all have it. Walden Books, they all have the book in their database, and you can order it. But if you recommend it for their local store, they'll also probably stock it, which just helps with the visibility of a book of this importance. So.
You made me kind of jealous. I'm jokingly saying this. A couple of things you did recently. First, you went to, I believe it's a NPR affiliate in Boston, right?
Yeah, WGBH, which is, that was my NPR of my childhood, and the PBS, channel 2 of my childhood growing up.
Yeah, because right before the pandemic, we were at a station for 38 years, and for the last 10 years or so, we were NPR affiliates. So I miss those times. The pandemic took care of. That's why we do it out of the home. And the second thing, you went back to your alma mater, where our station was out of Fairfield University, but you went back to New Hampshire, University of New Hampshire, right?
That's right. That's right.
Great.
Yeah.
Tell us about that night.
Thank you. Yeah, that so the 3 or 4 days after our most recent Parliament-Funkadelic World Tour, I had immediately skipped over to do these book promotion shows and events. We had just concluded a month-long tour, Parliament-Funkadelic and George Clinton, of Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, Australia, and Hawaii. And it was 30 days, 20 or 25 shows. I think it's like 24 flights, crazy travel. I'm still extremely jet lagged. I'm in a whole different time zone. I moved
Yeah.
time zones so quickly that we haven't even had a chance to catch up.
Right.
And I went home for 16 hours and then left for Boston to do All Things Considered
Mhm.
with Arun Roth.
Right.
who's, we were talking about COVID, and my mother was like, he was the voice of calm for us during COVID. It's so amazing you talked to him. My mother was so,
Oh,
I thought that was cool.
yeah.
Um, and so got to do that, which was excellent. And then drove up to Bangor, Maine, where we did the first official book release way up in Bangor, which is kind of a sleepy little town if you've never been up there. But actually, we had this massive turnout. It was really great. Sold a bunch of books, played a great curated set, and that prepared us for the next day, which was the bigger events at my alma mater at UNH, which is in Durham, New Hampshire, where I went as a historian. I got the degree as a historian of Middle Eastern Studies, graduated in '03. So coming back is always a treat. The UNH History Department actually put on the first two events of that day on October 3rd. It was a lecture that I did about the book and about all the historical surroundings of that book, and then a book signing right after, where we were able to sell a bunch of the books, a bunch of the pre-ordered kind of books that we were able to get a little early for that event, and then a very special curated concert. All in this Memorial Union building, which is kind of like the central building on campus, and did songs from those three albums, a lot of which I'm proud to say are ones we never get to do live. So it was a very special curated set using a lot of the original instruments too. We had like an ARP Pro soloist, which is, the instrument of that year in a lot of ways. And I talk about it in depth. One of the other really special people I was able to get for this book to talk to in primary source interview was Dina Perlman. She's the daughter of the great Alan R. Perlman, who founded ARP and was the fantastic creative genius who, in my opinion, created the best synthesizer ever made, which is the Pro Soloist. Bernie Worrell played more pro soloist stuff than any other synthesizer, even though he's very famous for his work on the Moog, the Moog, whatever you want to call it. He was even more prolific in a lot of ways, arguably, especially if you look at the quantity of work on the pro soloist. And so to have that at that concert and be able to use those exact presets, because I remember exactly which ones Bernie used for what songs, having studied with him myself, and getting to, because when I worked with him, he had a pro soloist, even in the 2000s. It was still part of his regular arsenal. So this is something he picked up, when it came out around 74, and continued to use as part of his regular thing all the way until his passing. So great to have like those original instruments on, the instruments that were on those records, the types of instruments that were on those records. And of course was joined by two of my bandmates from P-Funk, Mr. Lige Curry on bass and Mr. Benzel Cowan on drums. They form the other two parts of my trio, Secret Army. And then also had my sister, Elise Bedrosian, singing backup. She and I had been in bands since we were little kids. She's got a beautiful voice. And then my good friend John Deming, who was also a published, very famous poet, New York City, and also a graduate of UNH. And another good friend of ours, Nephrock, Neftalian McCrary, who is a P-Funk aficionado from Boston, from Boston area, and who is, just a hardcore, diehard P-Funk guy. And I knew he would be perfect for the job of doing these tunes. So we got to do some really fun stuff like Ride On and Bigfootin' and Stuffs and Things, and just songs we don't normally get to do with the corporate unit. So it was really fun, and I think a special treat for everybody who came, and had a great turnout. And so it was a great way to sort of kick off the beginning of promoting this book.
So do you have more plans before you go? A few dates in Texas with P-Funk. What's coming up?
So I have a number of promotional events, interviews, signings. I think I have about 16 or 17 between now and the actual release date. So they're all they're all
I think
just
you're
like
talking to
sit
Gabe
downs
today, right?
Tonight. Yep,
Yeah,
Gabe
yeah, I saw
Gonzalez.
that. Yeah, Gabe Gonzalez, great drummer. Yeah,
Yep, great drummer from P Funk, a real musicologist in his own right, and and what I like to call like a live musicologist, a living musicologist. And I don't say living in terms of alive. I mean in terms of transposing his direct knowledge of drum parts into his innate talent.
Mhm.
So he's one of these people that he really knows the way all the different drummers played, and he translates that into his own. He's also got his own insanely talented style of that he could just do him, but he does everybody so well. And I always tried to to model myself on musicians like him, because even before I knew that Gabe could do that, I knew who Gabe Gonzalez was. But more importantly, as a preteen and a teenager, it was always kind of my duty to find out the way every specific keyboard player played the parts on the records, not just the record, but the record was of penultimate importance. But the way everybody played it was so different. And understanding and sort of um, documenting those different styles, I felt was as important to the historicity as anything. So yeah,
yeah.
he's doing some great work himself. Very important work.
Since we last talked, we talked in that interview about the endangered species, the keyboardists in the P Funk history. I landed. I talked to Gary Hudgens. So,
Mm,
and you
I
inspired
saw
me
that
to
interview. It
talk
was
to
great.
Gary. Yeah, thanks. Real nice guy. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah, Gary's super special. He was an early influence on me in the '90s when I was, the early '90s when I was like 9, 10, 11, 12, and because that's when he was in the band,
right.
and they did this one song, Nickel Bag of Solos, and it was on
Oh,
this
okay.
four disc P Funk Live album that came out in '93 on P Vine. It was a Japanese label, but it had a number of different import versions that were released in America, in the UK, Europe, and all these other places. And they did on, I think it was on the third or fourth disc, they had that Nickel Bag of Solos where trombonist Greg Boyer, who I know you know, Greg,
Yeah, great guy.
um,
Yeah,
Gary Hudge and Blackbird all took solos, and Gary does the one in the middle. And it was the first time I'd really heard a keyboard player solo like that, and it was what I was really after. And so, like, I was after that kind of lead, almost guitar-y sound for a long time. And one of my first examples of it, along with Jan Hammer, was Gary Hudgens. He was huge influence on me in like '92, '93. Huge influence. So yeah, much love to
yeah.
Gary.
Jan Hammer. I remember that's definitely a
Oh,
'90s, early '90s reference, maybe late '80s. Yeah.
oh yeah. I mean, Jan Hammer was in Mahavishnu Orchestra in the '70s, so
Right.
that was
Right.
where I was really the first kind of synthesizer stuff. But yeah, he had a long career going through. But like
Right.
just his fusion style was an early influence on me trying to find a more bombastic way to express myself solo wise in keyboards.
I'm sure the P Funk family, and of course specifically George, was definitely saddened by Sly Stone's passing. And did they do recording towards the latter part of Sly's life? Were recordings
Oh,
still in the vault? A lot of stuff.
tons. I mean, no, a lot of it's out. Sly and George like best friends forever, and you can read about a lot of their escapades in both of their autobiographies. Um, and the good, the bad, and the ugly, but if you look at the sort of part of Sly's career when he resurfaced after that Grammys performance,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, 2010 or whatever that was, uh, Sly had been, even before that, Sly had been coming out, or maybe it was earlier than that. Sly had been coming out with us on the road with Parliament-Funkadelic on a pretty regular basis in 2008, 9, 10, those 3 years, and maybe even a little later. And he would come out, he'd do a little mini set in the set.
Okay.
Sometimes he'd have a keyboard, and he would just come up with something new, like completely innovative. it would be like there's a riot going on, like in a new way happening right in front of all of us. Like it's just
Right.
so with like the talk box and the little keyboard. And then some nights he would come out with his guitar and like we do I Want to Take You Higher and like thank you for letting me be myself and stuff. Like I'll never forget those times. There's a great recording on YouTube. I tell a lot of people. I don't know if we talked about it, but from the Chicago. I think it's the Chicago African Festival. It's something like that. But it's, Sly with P-Funk, with us, doing those songs, and he's up front with the guitar. And it's
Okay.
just like everybody in the comments, like, there's no way that's Sly. It can't be, like, because he's just looking and acting in a way that you haven't seen him look or act since before he kind of disappeared, in the
Right.
80s, before that, and it's a really special performance. It's
I'm gonna look that up.
08,
Yeah.
07 maybe, or 708, because Gary Scheider is still alive as well, and he's in it too. And we're doing all those dance to the music, and it's just
Wow.
such a great little medley, and it's all just kind of on the spot too. Like it wasn't planned, wasn't
Mhm.
rehearsed, and it's really good. On the recording side, yeah, Sly did a lot of recording with George, especially the '08 to 18 period. So he's on Gangsters of Love, George's 2008 solo album. He figures kind of prominently. He's on a couple things on there. He's on Shake the Gate, Funkadelic's return album, 2014. He appears on 5 songs on that album, including one that's just me and him called Yellow Light. And it's all just my keyboards, his keyboards, and he's singing. And like, he was always still innovating because, people ask me like, what were you guys like? What was it's Sly. Like, it's just like a lot of times it's like sounds and things you've just never heard before, and he's very much continued those same innovative strides he was making on things like Fresh and like Small Talk and stuff, but
Right.
like going in even further directions into the future, uh, with the keyboard technology he was using and with the sounds he was playing with. And he was just influenced by everything and influenced everyone. And it was an honor working with him the little bit that I did. But yeah, there's actually quite a big output of Sly stuff with P-Funk in that early 2010s, mid 2010s period, and you can find it on those later P-Funk albums. That's like one of the really cool things about those albums is Sly's uh his input. Like he did one song on that Shake the Gate, If I Didn't Love You. I mean,
Mhm.
that's genius. Like that, I don't know how else to put it, but just genius. That's one of my favorite Sly songs ever. And he cut that 10 years ago, you know what I mean? Or so, like it's not even from his, famous period or whatever. The guy was writing genius stuff all the way up until the very end.
So
So,
he just never wanted to get back into the rock star mode to go out and tour and do stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, just never
I,
happened.
a book could be written about the period where he kind of went into, the more like hibernation mode, if you will, or that kind of thing. There was a lot of stuff about missing gigs. When I lived in New England, I used to live next door to the guy who owned the Omni in Atlanta. He
Oh,
was the
okay.
owner back when it was like the Omni in the 70s, and, he told a story about he found out and I was real young. He was like, "Oh, you like Sly Stone?" I was, "Oh, I love Sly Stone." He's like, "Sly missed the gig and whatever," something about at the Omni in like 1972. But how that was kind of a likely story for Sly at that time, where he was missing a lot of the gigs. And even when he was in P-Funk, when he came back with P-Funk during my period, in my tenure, um, I remember when he came over with us to Japan, came all the
Mhm.
way to Japan for the Tokyo Jazz Festival, and he didn't do the gig. He came with us. We went all the way to Japan. He didn't actually perform. So
Right, right.
things like that were still happening all the way into, and I think a lot of that is the cult of personality, the person that you're made to be versus the person you are, and all the pressure that's put on you. You know, it's one thing when you're a sideman like myself, quote unquote, or a band member, but when it's all on you, you know, George is one of these people who has like the perfect kind of personality for this life, because his personality hasn't really changed throughout all the periods. You know, like things have changed, aspects have changed, modes have changed, but he's sort of that same pretty approachable guy that has had the same kind of, I don't want to say carefree attitude, because that takes away from his professionalism. It takes away from his workhorse. He's such a workhorse, you know. But semi carefree attitude, seemingly carefree attitude when it comes to the cult of personality and dealing with said cult of personality in the limelight and all the things that go with that. I think Sly is more like most of us in that it can be difficult. You know, I know that, you know, Bootsy talked about that being tough. I know that everybody from Prince, everybody's had their demons, fighting demons. George Clinton's one of those kind of, he's kind of impervious. You know, George got thick skin. He's just kind of impervious to that kind of thing for some reason, you know. Being Dr. Funkenstein didn't trip him out.
Yeah.
You know, the ego thing, he never got tripped out by ego. You know, everybody has an ego, you know, and he's a great band leader like James Brown. So of course it comes with the territory. But he never let that stuff get to him the way I feel like it got to a lot of the Michael Jacksons and all the other great. But he also maintained a certain level of undergroundness even when the band was skyrocketing at their highest point, which is 1978. There was still the joke, which one is George Clinton? I think that some of that was engineered, you know, on purpose. You know, maybe some of it was was like self protection, self preservation in a way. That's just conjecture, but he's definitely managed to have a very seemingly easy hold of his cult of personality and being able to manage and maintain it without all kinds of damage from the outside or from the inside, you know, which I think is commendable.
How many times did Peanut get mistaken for George coming off the tour bus? Did that happen a lot? I remember at Toads, people were like, it's George, it's George. No, it's not.
There was a time, you know, these days George comes out right at the very beginning of the show. He's just so energetic these days, you know, his like Benjamin Button years, if you will, like getting younger as he gets older. But I do remember a time when the shows were much longer and George had, you know, a 45-minute waiting period before he would even come out. And Peanut would come out towards the beginning and everybody would think it was George. And, you know, of course, me being like a diehard fan standing in the front, you know, when I was a teenager, I'd always get so mad. It's not George, it's Peanut. That's Peanut. Like, you know, equally mad that they don't know who Peanut is and that they think it's, you know, but I got so much love for Peanut. You know, he's actually the first member of the band I met. And he and I had a very long friendship and working relationship. And before he passed, he was creating what I would consider his magnum opus. He was just finishing his solo album, and it was so good, Joe. I mean, like, a lot of people don't realize how important Peanut was to like the overall texture of the vocal sound of P-Funk. A lot of times George, as producer, would tell the other singers, and a lot of the like really good singers, sing it like Peanut, because Peanut have a tone. You know, he and Mudbone did all those Bootsy's Rubber Band vocals, and they make two guys sound like a whole bunch of people, even live. The way they handled the harmonies, they stacked them in a way that they made two people sound like a lot more. And Peanut's vocal tone in general was so unique that it really, along with people like, you know, your Gary Scheiders and Mudbone, they really anchored a lot of the sound of the vocal beds, you know, the big choirs of people that were made up of the P-Funk sound. Peanut was a big part of that and rarely gets the credit he deserves. And then just for your viewers and for everybody out there, I want to throw out a song for people who don't know Peanut. I would look up Jimmy G and the Tackheads from the album Federation of Tackheads. The song's called Clockwork, and that's Peanut singing lead. And God, I mean, it's funny, like, there are people even in the organization like, is that the best P-Funk song ever? It might be. Like, you know, it's just one of those, like, silent, kind of, like, hidden stunner songs that people don't know about. And it's from that 80s period, you know, and a lot can be said, positive or negative, about the music in the 80s or even P-Funk's output in the 80s. But out of that 80s stuff with the synthesizers and the Linn drums and that kind of sound with the poly synths, it's one of the best ones from that period. It's an amazing song. So I recommend it for people
Give
who
us some
don't know.
homework. Yeah, I'm definitely dig that
Yeah,
up. Yeah.
it's a good one.
I wanted to ask you about the performance. It's on YouTube. It's great. On the porch, you guys are playing out there. Stripped down. What a performance. Tell us about prepping for that, and what was it like being outside? It was cold, right? That day.
Hot. It was brutally
Oh, it's hot.
hot.
Okay.
Yeah, it's brutally hot.
Okay.
No, it's okay. You know, it's funny because before I talk about the porch, a lot of times in concert, and this can be said probably by a lot of musicians, a lot of times I'll have a show, it will be done, and I'll think it was the worst show I ever played. And then I'll go back and see the recording and be like, wow, that was good. Like, even what I did was good, and I was worried that what I did was terrible. And then other times I think a show is great, and I go back and watch it, and I'll be like, that's what it was? Okay, I mean, it's all right. I thought it was amazing at the time. So perception can be really weird for a musician. You know, we're so up in our heads. We spend so much time working on material and perfecting our craft that we get really lost in the sauce of how it sounds in the moment, how we think we're doing. But to get to the porch, I had kind of a funny experience because, well, first of all, the guys who worked there are amazing, and they were so cool. But we had a gig that day, so our crew and our backline was all rushed over to the gig instead of the porch. So
Ah,
everything that you saw on the porch was backlined for the porch, but it wasn't our gear. It wasn't even our regular rental gear. It was just some kind of, oh, they don't have what they need, let's see what we can find type of thing, you know, which is fine. You know, it's a TV show, you got to make it work for how it works. But you know, I didn't have my keyboards, and the keyboard that they had was this like DJX thing, which is like almost, I don't want to say it's a toy, but it's kind of like, it's almost a toy. So I was like, oh man, how am I going to make this work?
uh-huh.
You know, like these piano parts and these things just doesn't really have any of the sounds I need, and the ones it does have are kind of weird. And you know, in the moment, I was kind of disappointed and just like, you know, because if you don't have all the stuff that you really need to make a P-Funk show, specifically in this particular case, exactly what you know it's supposed to be, you're going to feel, as a perfectionist or even as a competent musician, less than satisfied with said performance. However, although, and then also with the in-ear monitors, you never know. You're just kind of hearing these mixes. It's nothing like what it's going to end up being.
Right.
And then when I watched, I was like, oh, wow, you know, that sounds good, you know.
Yeah.
And a bunch of my buddies, musician friends, even artist friends of mine. One of my good friends, Brian Moss, is great artist and muralist from Ohio. He hit me up and he said, "Danny, now everybody's going to be buying the DJX. It's the new hot thing." But
Do you
he's
have
like,
one in your
everybody's
studio?
no.
No.
But he was like, everybody's going to be breaking it back out. It's going to be the new vintage. I'm like, you're so silly. But it ended up sounding really good, and you know, they did a very good job mixing it, and the people who do all the work on the porch do amazing work. I liked it so much better than our performance on Tiny Desk. But
Okay.
the only reason you know, and both situations were similar in that I wasn't allowed to have my own keyboards, and it was just kind of like, we have this thing here. You want to use that? Oh, okay, you know. But with regards to the porch, I just felt like it was a better example of our pocket, the pocket that we have as a band. And a couple of the guys in the vocal section, Bouvier and a couple of the younger guys, they were like, I didn't know how this was going to work. He's like, Danny and Benzel, the drummer Ben and myself, he said, Danny and Benzel sounded like they were standing right next to each other, and they were an entire yard away from each other. Usually we're right next to each other, and we're a big part of, along with Lige, a big part of kind of compounding that rhythm and getting that pocket right. And the three of us were standing nowhere near each other. Not only were we not near each other, we had to work really hard to hear each other. And despite that, we still managed to not only maintain our what I think would be close to our usual pocket, but like in my opinion, a very nice example of said pocket on a TV show, which doesn't always happen. Most of our TV appearances, first of all, are 2.5 minutes. Right. Second of all, they're usually medleys, which are not the best examples of pocket. They're a chance to showcase a bunch of stuff at once, in order to get as much information out there as possible for this rare media appearance. In that particular case with the Porch, I think it might be one of the finest examples of a televised P-Funk performance, at least in the contemporaneous era. So yeah, and I was really happy with how that turned out.
And Garrett was in and out.
Coincidentally,
Garrett came out, in and out.
Yeah.
Was he sitting on the porch at times or in the house?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
in the house. Yeah, over by the house. Yeah. It's cool. It's
there working it. Yeah.
It was a really nice opportunity. No, my wife actually wasn't there. Her cousin was, but no, Batavian wasn't able to make it for that one. She was home with the kiddos.
Okay. Yeah.
Taking them to school and such.
Yeah. I wanted to touch briefly on this. We were talking off air about, the fans don't see the musician's life behind the curtain and everything like that. And you alluded to the travel and everything like that, but how do you work the balance? Your wife's an artist herself, you've got kids, you're traveling different time zones, different countries, and making a living with legendary Hall of Famers, you guys.
Yeah, it is a careful balancing act. In addition, my wife's going to school for nursing. So, you balance that, you throw that in there. And then the fact that we have 3 kids who go to 3 different schools who have a ton of extracurriculars. And, and then, again, which you and I have touched on before, being a musician requires me to be extremely multidisciplinarian, which means 18-hour work days very often, almost every day. And so with all of that, I would say that the one word I can use that fully explains away the success or the ability just to get by is regiment. My regiment is everything for me, even when I'm jet lagged coming home off a tour and living in a different time zone. I do the same things at the same times every day for the most part. There are obvious exceptions, but I'm taking the kids to school. I'm making breakfast. I'm doing my classical practicing, my running, my exercising, my P-Funk practicing, my practicing for other groups, my studio work, my interview times, making dinner, teaching the kids piano lessons, going over homework with the kids, putting the kids to bed, which ones I'm putting to bed at whichever times. Right. They all happen at the exact same time every day.
Okay.
For the most part. And so this regiment allows me the sanity of schedule because I'm obsessive compulsive. I have definitely a bit of OCD. So I need to be compartmentalized in a way where I know that I'm at least getting as many things done that I need to get done. Like I'm already thinking about which business calls I need to make during my school commute to pick up one of my daughters. And then I take her to dance, I come back, and that's when I practice another bit of hours. Then I have to I have a special meeting with another client across town that goes in line with picking up the girls from another extracurricular. It's all kind of lined up in a way where I know my calendar is insane. It's insane. But there is a method to that madness. And what it requires is for the more I don't want to say inane things, but the more kind of tedious things like practicing, running, or even like school commutes, they have to be basically the same. Like every Tuesday is the same, every Friday is the same. And that allows me to get the work done that I need to get done and also do all the important familial things I have to do. And the same goes for Patavian. I know for her, she's regimented in her way as well, and she does 8 billion things a day. And I know the only way to get them done is to kind of figure out, scheduling wise, okay, we're doing this, then we're doing this, then we're doing this. But we always find time to come together as a family as well. We always have family dinner. We sit around, we talk about what we did that day. We're a very tight-knit family. We go places, we do things. It's very important to us. So yeah, I think there's a balance. Yeah, the fans don't see that, but I think that everybody can sympathize and empathize with that. I think we all have busy lives,
Right.
and finding a way to make it all work between the family life and the work life and the love life and all the different things. It's a balancing act for all of us. All of us responsible adults are in this world together. So I think that like it's more of a surprise how much like their lives, how much like everybody else's lives it is, rather than it being this anomalous thing that's like. But for those who don't know how many hours we do work a lot of hours. So that's one of the more crazy parts of it.
How are you sleeping on the road with a bunch
I
of
sleep
people
okay
around you?
on the road.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I sleep okay on the road. Sometimes I sleep more on the road. It depends, when I'm at home, I have so much work I have to get done that I tend to sleep less hours at home. I know that sounds kind of funny. Most people would think I'm not sleeping at all on the road, but on the road, you know, I learned at a certain point in my life, at a certain age, if you don't go home after the show, you're going to be useless at the show the next day, And if you
Right.
keep maintaining that, the after party, there's always an after party. There's always, and while sometimes it's important to be there, other times, for the most part, it's important to go to bed, especially
Yeah.
when you're on the road, and you can get worn out at home. Getting worn out on the road is easy. All it takes is one night to be done, and then too tired for the rest of the tour to do you're supposed to be performing at peak all the time, all
Right.
the time. And the moment you have to sacrifice that, you've realized you've done something stupid in order to sacrifice up against something great. So you want to maintain the greatness and the great thing. So, after the shows, I go home, I go to bed. I mean, go back to the hotel. I don't really do a lot of partying. I'm not, I'm 44. I spent my 20s and much of my 30s in that world. I think it's much more important for my voice to be intact or semi-intact, however much intact as it needs to be, to sing. And then
Yeah.
also just physicality, your back, your arms, your legs, we're not getting any younger. And
Mhm.
so like maintaining that and waking up early enough so that I can run every day is a big part of what helps me maintain the long shows with George. Yeah, and the long work days.
So a lot of great insight if you're a struggling musician, touring musician, you gave the manual right there. Yeah. Or Greg Boyer told me one time he could fall asleep anywhere. That's what he told me.
Yeah,
He
he's
said he
good. A
fell.
lot of the older guys, they are good for it. Like they're like, okay, I'm in a situation where it's not going to get any better. Like I have to get through this. I need take advantage, get the sleep now. Like they're smart with that. And
Yeah.
it is a skill set. Like that's not something that somebody just, I'm just able to do. No, it's a skill set. It's based on managing stress. Like he was actually humble about it. It's you know, it's worth bragging about because like that's a huge stress reducer. You could be in a situation where, something happened, like the bus broke down. Now we have to wait for another. There's nothing you can do. You're stuck. Everybody has to load up onto the other bus. So now there's 20 people waiting on one bus or whatever, and you're just sitting in this kind of stress. Because all you find a way to fall asleep.
Yeah.
It sounds stupid, but that's
Right.
gonna push you through to the next moment. And you don't know how long that next moment is going to be, or how much energy or effort it's going to take out of you, how much willpower or patience that you're going to have for that next moment without said sleep. So yeah, that's a brilliant skill set to have, honestly.
I got one final question for you. You're the
Sure.
music director of the band. Besides keeping your eyes on George, is there any other musician in the band you have to keep your eyes on specifically during the show? I mean, as
I
far
mean, I
as
think,
cues and stuff like that?
yeah. So, you know, Lige, Benzel, and myself, I feel hold an important place as the backline of the rhythm section of this
Mhm.
band. And a lot of my um, decision making really is either successful or not successful by the communication lines that are open between Lige, Benzel, and myself. Um, when a decision is made about adding a new part or adding a new song, a lot of the sort of trajectory for success comes from the eye contact between me and Lige, for
Okay.
instance. Um, we stand on either side of Benzel, either side of whoever the drummer may be throughout the years, and are instrumental, for lack of a better word, in allowing that trajectory to reach fruition. So it could be anything from we've been going to this bridge at the wrong time because it was medleyed and we're trying to go back to a more canonical status of a song. We're trying to go back to how it's supposed to feel as a song when we do it live. And all it requires is me and Lige to look at each other. And if
Right.
we do it, Benzel will do it, and more importantly, everybody else will do it. You got the bass, the chords, and the drums all going there. You feel the pickup come. Okay, everybody's able to come along. But I don't not look at any of the music. I look at all the musicians on the stage, the
Mhm.
players specifically, because it's super important to understanding there might be a part that one guy cues because he's the one who brings it in. And so everybody has to look to them at that one moment. And it might be just for one thing, one
Right.
moment of one song in the entire show. But if we don't all look at that guy or that person, it could be an issue. My main thing in terms of music direction has a lot to do with, and George will tell you this too, has a lot to do with rehearsals, working on new songs and established songs,
Mhm.
rehearsing songs George wants to work on, and then letting him know what we worked on as inspiration for him to choose what we're going to do in the set. So he's still very much the band leader, even the band director, if you will, leading the whole thing. He chooses what songs we do. He tells us what the first song is going to be, and then he calls each song. And we've talked about this before throughout the
Right.
set. Um, but I'll tell him what we rehearsed, and I'll call the
Okay.
rehearsals, and I'll
Okay.
call the songs at rehearsal, and I'll say, okay, can we do this again? Can we do that again? The engineers are relying on me to call things for their sound check purposes as well. So there's a technical and an artistic and set list aspect to sort of music direction, as it were. And so yeah, a lot of times they'll be like, yeah, George, we did this song, we did this. I know you wanted us to go over these, so we did these ones. Oh, and by the way, we did this, this, and this. He's like, you did? Yeah,
Oh,
it'd be something we never. Oh, let's start with that tonight. Which one? Oh, that. Oh, okay, cool. And then it'll be a new addition to the set list. That's why, in the recent years of my time handling music direction stuff for George, um, there's been a diversity, I think a nice diversity of songs added to and incorporated into the set list, uh, at least partially thanks to the incorporation of said songs into rehearsal time. And,
right.
all George needs to see is that we can do it or
Yeah.
that we have done it. That's all he needs is the confidence to know, oh, they got that? Okay, let's do it. That's all he needs. And then this massive um, song list to draw from can be an endless treasure trove of musical diversity into a set so that a set isn't stagnant. There were decades where we were playing basically the same set forever. And of course there are songs we have to always play.
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
not I'm not negating that. I'm just saying that there's a lot of stuff that we need to play. And there's a lot of stuff that we don't that we can play. There's a lot of stuff that we don't that we should play or that would be fun to play. So that's sort of my role more than anything else. And, I might I'll call some changes and things. It's time to go to certain changes, especially in songs we don't do often or songs, where it's a new thing. They're going to have me calling changes, go to the bridge here, watch me for the change. But more important than almost anything else is it's a curating role. It's really a curating role. It's listening to what George wants in his curation and curating things for him so that he has options.
Any rehearsal of Summer Swim?
Oh, wow. I never played Summer Swim with the band, but they were playing it in 96, 97.
Okay.
That was the second single off of that, The Awesome Power of Fully Operational Mothership album from 96. And they were doing it. I never got to see them do it live other than like on a video much later. But I do remember when they were doing it in the shows and somebody was like, oh, they played it in New York. I was like, oh man, they didn't play it in Boston, or whatever. It was something they did a little bit. They might have done it a few times. Like it wasn't a whole bunch of times, but yeah.
It's one of my faves. Yeah.
That's a great one.
Yeah. So Danny Bedrosian, honored to have you on the show again. Always a history lesson for myself. I'll go back and hear what you're saying. I'm like, oh yeah, man. Yeah. Okay. That was deep. I mean, you always are entertaining and informative and smart guys. So, point to the book right there. Make My Funk the P-Funk. Daniel Bedrosian. That's even better right there. Available now. Order it and through your favorite ordering for all sorts of media like that. He's on the press tour. He's busy with interviews, book signings. Where can people keep up on that as far as where you're going to be and what's going on?
You can follow me on my Instagram. It's just my name, Danny Bedrosian. Same with on Facebook. I also have one for my band, Danny Bedrosian and Secret Army. We're playing a whole bunch of dates in promotion of the book. We got dates back up in the Northeast in December in promotion of the book. And so you can follow all the tour dates on those pages. And then also on my podcast, there's a YouTube channel for it. It's called Danny on Everything. And it deals with all my promotions, all the new things coming out. And then also has some great interviews and other back matter too that's useful and appropriate to the subject matter.
And Bump by Bump Rundown on
of
George's,
course, Bump
right?
by Bump Rundown with George. Yeah, George's Patreon and all that stuff where there's a lot of really great, kind of just rare and unheard P-Funk.
All right. I'm going to be digging into the new book very, very soon, as soon as it arrives. And the third book, I'm sure they're going to be knocking. When are you going to put it out, Danny? Come on. When are you going to put it out? The publishers, right?
The third book has already been approved.
Oh, okay.
And so we're going to have to, and it'll be 2026.
Okay.
But I can't say what it is yet, but but I will probably be talking to you soon about it. It will be out next year. I have a December deadline, so I'm I'm heavy in the deadline mode right now.
Oh, you got to have it pretty much written by December?
Uh-huh.
Okay. All right. I better let you go then. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much for your platform. It's always an honor.
To you and your wife and your family.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your show and thank you for all you do.
Thanks, brother. All right.
Appreciate it.